Okay, so we're going to be starting off today's show the same way we start off every show on Tuesday, and that is with my 10 main takeaways of the week from week 3 of the NFL season. So, boys, hit the music. Here we go. Takeaway number 1. The NFL's overtime rules are atrocious, and the Eagles have a lot to be worried about. I still don't understand why exactly we have ties in the National Football League, and I don't understand why the NFL is putting an emphasis on it. Like, originally, overtime was 15 minutes, now it's 10 minutes, and watching that Eagle-Bengal game the other day really just reminded you, a tie can really screw things up when it comes to the standings, and I know technically a tie is half a win and half a loss, but I just don't think games ever should be ended in ties. When you look at the Philadelphia Eagles, look, I think this team could be in big, big trouble. And the main thing that I realized from all this is that, Carson Wentz and the Eagles offense just doesn't look the same as it did a couple years ago when he was out here winning the MVP. If you listen to this show, you guys know I was actually pretty high on the Philadelphia Eagles coming into this season, and unfortunately, they haven't been good so far. But I just remember, when Doug Peterson first got to Philadelphia and the Eagles were out here winning Super Bowls, I just remember thinking to myself, wow, this offense is super unpredictable, and they could really make a big play at any time behind your Carson Wentz's, and I thought behind Miles Sanders and Alshon Jeffrey and, guys like that, Zach Ertz. But unfortunately, if you're a Philadelphia Eagle fan, it just flat out hasn't worked out that way. And I think this team could be in big, big trouble. The one thing right now they really have going for them is the fact that they are in a NFC East that just flat out is not playing any good football right now. Moving on to takeaway number 2. The NFC as a whole, as a conference, just isn't as good as I thought it was. And as crazy as this sounds, do you guys think there's any possibility whatsoever that the NFC West gets 4 teams into the playoffs? Think about it. All 4 teams in that division, including San Francisco, had a nice win on Sunday. They didn't all win, but they're all playing pretty good football. I think there are 4 really good football teams in that division. And look at the other divisions. In the NFC North, I know Chicago is 3-0. Who is a good football team besides Green Bay? In the NFC East, they're not having more than 1 team make the playoffs. And in the NFC South, Tampa Bay looks like the best team to me right now, but New Orleans doesn't look good at all. We're going to get into them a little bit at the back end of the show. Atlanta's 0-3. Carolina's 1-2. I don't think anyone has taken them seriously. So I think 4 of the 7 best teams in the NFC are from the NFC West. The question is ultimately, once these division games start getting played, what's going to happen? So far, Arizona has played San Francisco. They played in week 1, and I believe that has been the only NFC West division game played. When we have games like Arizona and Seattle and the Rams and the 49ers, you're going to throw them and Kyle Shanahan into that mix. I really like the NFC West, and I think there is a chance that somehow, some way, for the first time ever, all 4 teams in one division end up making the playoffs. And it's funny because I remember in the preseason I was talking about just exactly how good the NFC is, but there have actually been plenty of teams throughout the NFC that have really disappointed expectations. When you look at Minnesota, you look at Atlanta, you look at Detroit, you look at New Orleans even to some extent. The NFC overall as a conference, I think, has been pretty disappointing so far. Moving on to the next observation. Josh Allen is just super erratic, and I don't trust him to win a Super Bowl ever. And here's what I mean by this. I think when you look at Josh Allen, right, everyone on Twitter was saying, wow, the Bills look so good in their, early in that game against the Rams. And I'll admit, the Buffalo looked pretty good to start the game, and they were up 28-3, and everything was going really well. And I know they ended up winning the game, although be it on a BS pass interference call. But when you look at this game, I don't think Buffalo should be acting like, they really did anything. If your goal as a Bills fan is to make the playoffs, I think that's fine. And I do think your defense, your coach is good enough to lead you there. And I do think Josh Allen has improved as the season has gone on. The only problem is this. I don't think Buffalo, with their current quarterback, has any chance of beating Baltimore or Kansas City. They just can't be able to score with them. And I know we're going to be able to see what exactly Buffalo is really made out of come the next 3 weeks when they head to Vegas, when they head to Tennessee, and when they host the Kansas City Chiefs on Thursday Night Football. But it will be interesting to see how exactly this all goes. When you look at Buffalo, they played really well in the first quarter against the Rams, and Twitter was just buzzing over them. And when you consider also that they played the Jets and the Bills in week 2, the Jets and the Dolphins in week 2, and Miami was actually pretty competitive in that week 2 game with Buffalo, whose defense actually hasn't been that impressive so far. I guess I'll give Buffalo credit for winning the game after the BSPI call, but I still don't trust Josh Allen in a big game. He's super erratic. He had a 15-yard face mask personal foul in the game that really, I think, cost Buffalo a bit of momentum. And I think he's a loose cannon. I think eventually, like he did in the playoffs last year, he's the kind of guy that could blow up a game for that Bills team, and they have to be very careful. Let's go back to the Cincinnati-Philadelphia game for a minute. I just think this guy, Joe Burrow, needs some protection. And if you give this guy like a decent offensive line, I actually think Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals could be a solid and competitive football team during the 2020 season. But keeping the first overall pick upright should be, I think, at the top of the Bengals' priority list going forward. You know, I'm sure the Bengals, top of the organization, realizes it, but I think it's ridiculous to see Joe Burrow just out here scrambling for his life on almost every snap. Seeing the one massive hit he took on Sunday, I believe it was from Brandon Graham, was even more worrisome. And I'm watching the video right now. It was basically... yeah, Derek Barnett was chasing him at number 97 on Philadelphia. I didn't think it was a dirty hit. I think Malik Jackson was. He was just called for a penalty because I think he hit him too hard. And that, I think, is a big, big flaw when it comes to today's National Football League and the way the game is being officiated. But at the same time, I do think when you look at Cincinnati and Joe Burrow, he has some weapons, and T. Higgins was another guy that caught a couple touchdown passes for Cincinnati on Sunday, who I was pretty impressed with. I think if guys like Higgins and Green and Tyler Boyd could keep this mix rolling, the Cincinnati Bengals could be probably better a little sooner than we've expected. You know, I don't know how much we can make of Zach Taylor as a head football coach right now. You know, he's been on the job for a year. He hasn't won much, but I don't think it would really be that fair to judge him given the current personnel that his Cincinnati Bengals team has. But at the same time, you know, Joe Burrow, if he can make it through this season, playing 16 games and staying upright and winning a handful of them down the way, even tying in Philadelphia is a big win, I think, for Cincinnati. I think you could consider this season to be a big, big success. Moving on to the fifth observation. How about Nick Foles? And he definitely deserves to be the Chicago Bears quarterback for the rest of the season. Mitchell Trubisky is just not very good at the game of football. And as unfortunate as that is, I hate to say it, I just think it's the truth, man. Chicago's offense couldn't get anything done in this game against the Atlanta Falcons. And even though Nick Foles didn't play great, if you watch the game, I really just think he made 2 or 3 really nice plays. That's definitely more than Mitchell Trubisky. And he deserves credit for that, I guess. Chicago right now, even though they're 3-0, I don't think a lot of people are really taking them seriously as a legitimate contender in the NFC. But the NFC, as I said earlier, is a wide open conference, and their schedule isn't too hard. Their next 2 games, I think, are both super winnable when they will host the Indianapolis Colts and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on a Thursday night. If Chicago could just keep on winning, I think their team could be in a pretty good spot. But, you know, it really just depends on Nick Foles. He obviously didn't play that great against with Jacksonville last year, but I think Ryan Pace, when he decided to bring in Nick Foles, kind of sent a message to the rest of the Bears fan base and organization that, look, even though I made a mistake drafting Mitchell Trubisky, I don't believe in him, and here's the guy I think could fix it, because they still are paying Nick Foles a decent amount of money, and if you just see Mitchell Trubisky out there on the field just not playing well, and you see a guy in Nick Foles with the experience he had, I don't think Matt Nagy needed to make any other choice. It was a pretty easy decision from here that Nick Foles is going to be starting at quarterback under center for the Chicago Bears for the near future. And I think when you look at how exactly the weapons and that team is built right now, maybe they could have something going. Their defense is still one of the better units in football with Khalil Mack running the way. And if you're a Falcon fan, I just don't know what to tell you. Just what a brutal, brutal collapse. Observation number 6. I still think the Los Angeles Rams had a reason to leave their game against the Buffalo Bills with their heads up high. I totally understand a loss is never a good thing, especially when the referees, I think, kind of took the game away from you. But it's telling that the team could will its way back from a 28-3 deficit. The Bills, I think, are one of the hotter teams in the league, and even despite a loss, the Rams have looked pretty good throughout the first 3 games of the season so far. And even if the defense looks better than a year ago, that's a big key with this Rams team as well. Their defense has been playing pretty solid with the new coordinator. I'd still have confidence in Sean McVay's squad to have a good season, and the NFC West is just super, super competitive. And you guys know if you listen to this show, my concern with the Rams this season was actually not Jared Goff. I believe if you give Jared Goff at least a decent amount of what he's had in the past, with a solid offensive line and a solid running game, he could still be a pretty productive quarterback in the NFL. I think a lot of people, after a poor season last year, all of a sudden were just ready to jump ship when it came to Jared Goff. But I think at the same time, when provided with good enough weapons, this kid could play, and he played pretty well against the Bills the other day. I think people, once again, were just too quickly to jump off the bandwagon when it comes to Jared Goff. This guy in 2018 went into New Orleans and won a big playoff game and ended up leading the Los Angeles Rams to a Super Bowl. His first year, he wasn't, he obviously wasn't good. I think that's a wash. But the first season when Sean McVay came in, this guy totally looked like a different football player. And I think Sean McVay is one of the 7 best coaches in the NFL. That guy could really coach. I feel like he has his team ready to play most days. And this Rams team is going to be very interesting to see what they look like. They will host the Giants next week in a game that they probably should win. You win that one, you're looking at 3-1 and just taking advantage of your schedule. Speaking of the New York Giants, let's talk about them for a bit, because I got to be honest with you guys. I just don't know what's wrong with this team, man. I really don't. I'm not saying they should be 3-0 right now or even 2-1, but the bottom line is this. Even without Saquon Barkley, they had an opportunity on Sunday at home against probably the most banged-up football team I have ever seen in the San Francisco 49ers. And not only did they lose, it wasn't even competitive. And the New York Giants, I know this is a super cliche thing to say, but they're usually one of the better run organizations in sports. The Mara and Tisch family, all they expect is to win. And over the last 8 or 9 years, really since the Giants won that Super Bowl title in 2011, they really just haven't been able to break through the hump at all. No matter who the coach is, no matter who they bring in on defense or the offensive line, this Giant team just once again is not very good right now. And when you combine them with the other New York team, the Jets, it is just not a very good state for New York football right now. But if you listen to the show, I was actually higher on the Giants than most to start the season. Just when you looked at the fact that they had Daniel Jones, they had Saquon Barkley, I thought the receivers and their offensive line was going to be improved, but I just didn't think their defense was going to be this bad, especially against a 49er offense where Nick Mullins was leading them. I just think if you're a fan of the New York Giants, you need to expect better. And this first couple games under Joe Judge as the new head coach haven't really turned out the way you've wanted them to so far. I like the Joe Judge hire just because it was a little bit out of the box, but so far it hasn't really turned out. This guy canceling practice to start the season. Hopefully the players want to play for him. I guess you could say that so far they do, but it's still super early in his career, and with a tough game against the Los Angeles Rams next week, the Giants could very well be looking at 0-4 straight in the face. Moving on to the next takeaway I have. How about the Seattle Seahawks? And Russell Wilson is on a mission. I know it's super early to talk about MVPs, and, I usually don't think until week 8 or 9 is the right time to have that conversation, and you could definitely say Russell Wilson could be the MVP. He's definitely a candidate, though, and this guy is just playing football that is just astounding. He kind of reminds me of what I saw from Patrick Mahomes during his first year playing when he ended up winning the MVP. I mean, this guy through 3 games has 13 touchdowns and 1 interception, and it could have been 14 if my guy DK Metcalf would have, remembered to just hold on to the ball and run through the whole play. I still don't know how exactly he caught that ball. But Seattle, it's interesting when you're comparing them to some of the other teams at the top of the NFC, because obviously we know their offense could score with anyone. Russell Wilson is playing, just an absolutely absurd brand of football right now. Hopefully Chris Carson is healthy at running back. I also really like their top 2 wide receivers of Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. Those are probably 2 of the better weapons Russell Wilson has had really since Doug Baldwin was out there in Seattle. And see, the only issue I have with Seattle, though, is their defense. I don't think they're that complete of a football team. And the fact that they let Atlanta, New England, and Dallas really march down the field and, score whenever they want. If you do that against Atlanta and Dallas, that's one thing. But Cam Newton should not have been throwing the ball on Seattle the way he was the other day. So that's my only concern with Seattle. I think eventually Russell Wilson is going to have a game where he throws maybe 1 or 2 touchdowns as opposed to 3 or 4. And that will probably be when Seattle's defense really has to step up and make a play in a big spot. And I just don't necessarily know if I trust them to do that right now. I think Green Bay is probably the more complete football team, but Seattle is still really, really good. And Russell Wilson is just keeps making me proud every day as a guy who picked the Seahawks in the preseason to win the Super Bowl. I guess I'm not going by that pick, but Green Bay right now looks like a really good football team. We'll stay with this game, and that is the Dallas Cowboys are very close to being 0-3. And I feel like if they don't recover that onside kick against the Atlanta Falcons, we could be having a whole different conversation about the way this Dallas Cowboy team has played. And if the Cowboys are 0-3, you guys know that, as always, that would be the number one story that people are paying attention to in this NFL. I mean, I was impressed with the way Dak Prescott played on Sunday with his pure passing ability. The problem was, it didn't start until Seattle was up by 15 points. And that's ultimately my problem with Dak. I think his ceiling is the 10th best quarterback in football. I think he's a guy that, with the perfect situation like he has in Dallas, a really good offensive line, a really good running back, really good weapons, I just can't put this guy on the same level as some of the other stud quarterbacks in the NFL. And when you look at Dallas, they should have lost that Atlanta game. Their defense right now is god-awful. And still, I'm not going to trust them to totally break the hump and break through until they win a couple games in a row or they win a big game. Because Mike McCarthy, you guys know if you listen to this show, I wasn't too high on this hire to start the season. And when you look at Dallas' schedule for the next upcoming weeks, they have a home game against Cleveland on Sunday. Do I feel 100% confident that they're going to win that game? To be honest with you, absolutely not. I think that's kind of a coin flip game. And I just still cannot trust Dallas for my life. Now, the one thing they do have going for them is that they're in the NFC East, which is definitely the worst division in football. It's just an absolute train wreck when you look at the current state of the Eagles and the Giants and the Washington football team and Dallas. So I guess you could say they are the best team in the division right now. I just still don't trust them at all to make a deep run or even get there yet. I'm not ready to give up on Philadelphia completely, even though it's still super, super concerning. My final observation. Maybe this Pittsburgh Steelers team is different. If you listen to this show, you guys know I was super high on the Steelers in the preseason. I picked them to come out of the AFC and win the AFC North. But I actually expected them and picked them to lose to the Houston Texans on Sunday. I just thought Deshaun Watson was going to come out desperate, and the Steelers every year I feel like have one of these games, maybe 1 or 2, where they just don't come ready to play, and for me that usually falls on Mike Tomlin. But Mike Tomlin has led the Steelers to a really nice 3-0 start to the season, and pending their protocol on Sunday, they have a game against the Tennessee Titans, and the thing about that is this. About an hour ago, breaking news from the NFL came out that the Titans and Vikings have each shut down their practice facility due to COVID concerns, and the Steelers and Titans game, may get shifted to about week 8 when that's basically how the schedule works out. So if that game is postponed this weekend, maybe that will take away some momentum, from the Pittsburgh Steelers squad. But still, at the same time, this team may be different, man. Ben Roethlisberger, Juju Smith-Schuster is out here making plays. James Conner and Benny Snell are both out here running the ball pretty nicely. I like the play calling. Pittsburgh looks really good to me. They are still my pick to win the AFC North. As for Houston, I hate to say they're wasting Deshaun Watson, but I just feel like they are, man. This team just isn't very good right now, and that's a big, big problem if you're a fan of the Houston Texans. Luckily, their division isn't too tough either, but they are now 3 games behind the first-place Tennessee Titans, who got a win over Minnesota. And Bill O'Brien, we know it was a big mistake that he traded Nuke Hopkins. Obviously, the schedule for Houston has been very tough, but I would have just expected them to come out a little more competitive in these kind of games. So those are my 10 thoughts from Week 3.